The great 20th century theologian and mystic, the great Roman Catholic Thomas Merton once wisely said that our idea of God tells us more about ourselves than about God. Well, thank God for that. If the boundaries of theology, if the boundaries of the truth of God were defined by human beings, then we might be easily led to believe that God hates all the same people that we do. A quick tour of the internet will let you know that God really does hate Muslims. Yeah. And God hates immigrants, God especially hates gay people, and strong women are on God's hit list, as are Democrats and Republicans. According to these theologies, God is so busy hating people that she hardly has time to run the universe. But God doesn't hate anyone. That is the worst kind of heresy there is. The whole message of the gospel is summed up in that sublime verse from John. For God so loved the whole world that God sent his Son. Sometimes we liberal Christians imagine that judgmentalism is really the problem of the other side. But it has been my experience of the Christian faith that a liberal interpretation does not immune me from judging others, especially those other Christians who don't believe like I do or think like I do. The result of all this judging and finger-pointing is that the church has become exactly like Washington, D.C., gridlocked, stuck, entrenched. We're so entrenched in our opinions, in our need to be right, that we hardly have time anymore, it seems, for works of justice and mercy, the very things to which we have been called. And guess what? The rest of the world has taken notice of this. They think we are irrelevant and hypocrites. One day, Jesus entered a town named Capernaum, and a Roman centurion heard that he was in town. The centurion was so named because he was in charge of about 100 soldiers. And centurions were dispersed all over the empire in order to enforce the Pax Romana and to, of course, collect taxes. Centurions had the reputation of being brutal and rather stupid, and the people hated them. They hated them. This centurion, however, had heard about Jesus' miracles, and so he sent word to the Jewish elders to go and ask Jesus to come and heal his beloved servant. How like a soldier to want to go through the chain of command, right? First you go to the Jewish elders, who then go to Jesus to ask him a favor. And so the elders went and said to Jesus, "Why don't you help this guy out? He's one of the good ones. He even built a synagogue for our people." So Jesus went. But before he could arrive at the centurion's house, the centurion sent his friends to say that Jesus didn't really need to come at all. That if Jesus would only speak a word of help about or to this slave, the slave would be healed. Once again, the centurion talks about power structures, and he says, "You know, I have people that work for me too. I know how this works, Jesus. I say to one soldier, go, and he goes. I say to my slave, do this, and he does that." I'm not sure that it was the centurion's take on power that impressed Jesus, but his faith certainly did. In all my days, all over Israel, I have never seen faith like this, Jesus marveled. that was that. Jesus never went to the centurion's house. We're told that the slave was healed by implication, that when the friends of the centurion went home, guess what? The servant was well. Now, at first glance, this appears to be just another healing story in the Gospels among so many healing stories. But the details of this story can be rather troubling to some. Troubling, actually, to both sides on this culture war of ours. Troubling to those of us caught in the trap of judging others and kind of liking it. This story is troubling for the details of the story, but also troubling for what Jesus did not say when he had the perfect opportunity to say it. First of all, notice the closeness of the centurion and his servant. That's unusual. Servants were property. Servants were often mistreated or ignored, but these two were extraordinarily close to one another. They were so connected to one another that the commander, a commander of the empire, humbled himself to Jesus. Jesus, someone who was much lower on the social scale than he was. Why would he do that? Some scholars have suggested that the centurion and the servant were actually lovers. And they make that assumption based on the language of the New Testament. When the servant is first referenced in this story, Luke uses the word doulos, which simply means servant. But later on, when the centurion refers to his servant, he uses a different word. He uses the word pais. And that too can mean servant. But more often in the ancient world, that is the word that was used for somebody who was more than just a servant. In Thucydides, in Plutarch, in other ancient Greek sources, when the word pais is used, that is exactly what it means. And we know that in ancient Greek and Roman cultures, it was not unusual for an older man in authority to take a younger male or female lover, sometimes from among the servants. Was love the reason that the centurion was so concerned? Did Jesus heal a same-sex partner, as a blogger recently put it? Well, the answer is we don't know. We don't know because Jesus is silent about their relationship. And Jesus is silent about the institution of slavery in which this young man lived. Here was the perfect opportunity for Jesus to address two of the hot-button issues of our day and his day, to make it plain, to settle the argument. But he did not. Likewise, Jesus also had the perfect opportunity to say something about the oppressive Roman Empire. He could have confronted the centurion about how he made his living and who paid his salary. This centurion might have been a good one. After all, he built a synagogue for the people, but the empire he represented, the empire he worked for, was the enemy of the faith. Remember that early Christians thought of Jesus as the anti-Caesar. They went around saying, Jesus is Lord. In other words, Caesar is not. As such, a centurion petitioning Jesus for a miracle would have come as a great surprise to these first hearers. Why didn't Jesus tell this man that blessed are the peacemakers? Why didn't he give him a lesson about turning the other cheek or talk about swords being beaten into plowshares? But he didn't. He was silent. Do you see what I mean about this being a rather dissatisfying story? On the one hand, we have the possibility of a same-sex relationship right in the New Testament, and Jesus offers no clarity on that. Likewise, Jesus doesn't say a word about the institution of slavery or the brutalities of the empire. And this week, I wondered why. Why? And then it became really plain. Why? It struck me that when any of us are faced with great human need, arguments are vulgar. They're vulgar. It's not that the subjects we argue about are not important. Our work is the work of justice, and sometimes we have to have a lot of passion to get that justice done. But remember that the payas, the young servant, was hanging between life and death at that very moment. If you have ever been in a room when someone's death is imminent, then you know that everything else around you seems to compress into the smallest and most insignificant of packages. And your attention is focused like a laser on the needs of that person, on what is merciful. How often is mercy ignored when we are so focused on winning an argument? New York is a tough town. You all know that. You live here. But more than once, in the middle of all of our differences, I have witnessed those differences fall away as people instantly, without thinking, by instinct, focus on need and mercy. A woman trips on the sidewalk. A man faints on a subway platform. An old person cannot get up the steps. A child is lost. In those moments, no one asks, no one thinks to ask, no one cares. Whether you are Jewish or Sikh or an anarchist or a hipster or a Republican. Instead, hands reach out from everywhere to heal and help and comfort. Because it is our instinct to be merciful, planted within us by the Holy Spirit. But it is our duty to cultivate that mercy, to feed it, to water it, until it grows on its own, and it defines the way we live, together, day by day.